So we are going to take some questions here. Let me remind everyone who's a lawyer or judge in this first session, your number is 8100. Make sure you wrote that down somewhere. You know, we didn't rehearse this morning. We didn't all get together and decide, here's how we're going to approach all of these problems and how this discussion was going to develop. But it is helpful, and it's frightening that everybody's on the same page. And helpful is, I said first, because I think it is very helpful that we've had this discussion today. So are there questions from the audience that we can have one of these experts address? Oh, surely there's some questions. And I don't know if we have anyone online that's checking to see if we have questions that may be being submitted to us in a remote setting. But I guess my question to all of the panelists, knowing that we need to support the younger generation coming up, because I think that's where we all were. I know when 2020 hit, I happened to have the honor at that point of being Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And of course, there were no rules, and there were no guidelines, and there were no statutes in place. But I tried to learn as quickly as I could from everybody else in the universe that was looking at this issue. One of the things that I did, I reached out to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals to join the Supreme Court in having some joint policies that would help guide the trial courts around the state of Oklahoma. Now, that's not something that happens very often, that our two courts work together in a leadership position, but I'm very proud to say that during COVID, we did. All of the district judges stood up, immediately got involved. We had a pandemic committee that we met remotely. We started seeing where everybody was around the state. We tried to figure out, watching what the politicians were doing with their policies, and watching what we had to do to keep our judges and court staff safe. And that was our first concern, was the safety. And I know I talked to a number of younger people in that time frame about taking an in-person bar exam, which we did have an in-person bar exam in July of 2020, but I had also worked with the Oklahoma City County Health Department, and we felt like and with the law schools, and I felt like we were in the safest place you could be. I think it was like being in prison a little bit. If you'd been studying for the bar, you should have been reclusive and in your own space. And then when you came to the facility to take the bar exam, we had everything in place that we could come up with, and we had no transmission reported. But I had a number of young people who called, and they were, I can't do this, I'm too fearful. I said, I don't know what it will be, but I can tell you that if you have the privilege of practicing law for 30 years or more, and you're like I have, I said, this is not the biggest crisis you're going to have. I don't know what it will be, but this is not it. And I think that's part of it, is learning how to have crisis management. I always tell young students, law students, and high school kids and college kids that I run into, if you're coming into the practice of law, you're coming into a profession that requires problem solving. That's what we do. We are immersed in everyone's problems, and we are helping them solve their problems. I think the medical community is much like that. I mean, that is, I think, explains to me, and my own, without any training, and I am certainly not the expert, as I mentioned, but my observation is that when we are in an arena, we are trying to help people get better, feel someone's listening, feel like it matters that they exist in front of us for even 15 minutes in a court setting. All of those things make such a difference because we are trying to help people get better legally, medically, emotionally. We don't want to instill fear into people when they come in the courtroom. Everybody's always in fear when they come in the courthouse, right? I mean, what we see in the legal profession are people at their worst. What you all see in the medical profession are also the same problems, people at their worst, in the worst setting they've ever had, the worst trauma they've ever faced. And so, it's preaching to the choir here, obviously. We're all in this together, but I appreciate so much what everyone has said here, because I feel comforted to know that these women are in charge of some part of my life in Oklahoma, and are showing real leadership. And I'm not saying that there aren't men in the room doing the same thing. That's not the point of this. But I think people that are probably here today are interested in leadership, and figuring out how we make things better for people around us. Kindness is such a great strategy. I grew up in the legal profession with mostly men, and they were grumpy and they were mean and they were bullies. And that's the way you handled your clients and you handled the opposition. And there were fist fights in the hall and there were all this kind of stuff. And I decided early on, first of all, I saw some really great role models on the bench, not very many that cared much about women practicing law. There were a few. But I also learned that I can never be so mean and rotten and grumpy and bully as all these guys around me, but I can be nice. And they cannot be nicer than I can be, because I can be very, very nice, because it's part of my personality. And I started seeing, I disarmed people. There were men that I worked with. They didn't even know what to do when they said something grumpy and mean to me, and I turned around and asked if I could do them a favor. It is really incredible what that does, and it does change. And I am not the educated person here. I'm just saying I've listened to all this and I've learned, but I think that's exactly where we have to be. You have to, I know it's the turn the other cheek. It's the, go in your office and scream. I mean, it's, go in the closet. I mean, shake it out, do something, get active, do something healthy. Send a postcard to somebody. I know nobody writes notes anymore. We have one of our justices, Justice Rowe, who writes notes to everybody all the time. Justice Opala, that was mentioned earlier, he wrote notes to people all the time. Sometimes, and they're nice notes. They're not mean notes. Don't send that email. If you're in the legal world, do not send the email. All right, I'm talking too much. I didn't mean to. I would like to we have some questions.
Yes, Justice, thank you. Appreciate your comments. I think maybe our world as a whole would be better off internationally if we had more women in positions of leadership for the very purposes that you're talking about. But now to my question. I think given the general topic we've looked at this morning and the data that was presented generally showing increased societal acceptance and usage of cannabis and declining use of prescription drugs, tobacco, alcohol, etc. From a utilitarian perspective, is that good or bad, and why?
That's an interesting question. First off, I would say whenever somebody uses a substance of any type, it's a coping mechanism, right? They're experiencing stress, they're experiencing anxiety, they have a lot going in their life, and they want to escape that for a period of time. Marijuana is the same way, alcohol is the same way. I would say there are much healthier ways to do that than the use of a substance. So when you say, is it good or bad? I would say it's bad from the perspective that you're not developing healthy coping mechanisms to deal with stress and anxiety, and you're not actually looking at what is causing the stress and anxiety and making changes around that. So at the core, anything that's going to alter your mind is avoiding dealing with the problem and not dealing with the problem in a proactive way. I think a lot of people start to ask the question of, well, which is worse, in terms of substances, but all substances have that same effect. So I wouldn't rate them as worse or better. What I would say is, in particular, in the developing brain, they're both, alcohol or marijuana, both incredibly damaging. And there is plenty of research to show that within the developing brain, the use of marijuana has long-term and lifelong consequences. It can permanently affect your memory. It can permanently affect your IQ. it can, not to mention the things about avoiding developing positive coping skills, it can permanently affect your brain. And so I think in particular in the developing brain, both of those substances are in particularly very harmful. And I think it's something we need to teach our kids about. And as we have learned through so much, we can't teach them that through reefer madness or just say no. I mean, there's plenty of research that shows those things don't work. And really what does work is sitting down and having honest conversations, answering questions honestly, even getting a youth to delay use until they're past the point of the development of their brain, and having those conversations is a huge deal. What I would say is that we are in a more stressful society, or we experience stress more, I think, than any other time in history, at least in the United States. And that's pretty strange to say, considering we've been through world wars, etc. But the thing that is so different today that stands out to me is the vicarious trauma that we all experience every day. 50, 60, 70 years ago, the trauma you experienced were the events that happened around you. What happened with your neighbor, what happened with your family, what happened at school or work. And it was kept to a manageable minimum. But today, the first thing we do when we wake up is we open whatever device we happen to have handy, tablet, laptop, iPhone, and we're inundated with trauma. And that is the case from the time we wake up till the time we go to bed. And that has a huge effect on all of us. And we're going to have to learn either to self-regulate that. Just because we have access doesn't mean it's good for us to have that kind of access. And then the flip side is, as we've become a society that is so focused on productivity and profit, we take care of ourselves less than in previous generations. So we're going to have to focus on self-regulating what we ingest on a daily basis and focus on doing things that pump back into us. And so that was a really long answer to which substance is worse. I would say neither one is great for your brain or your overall health.
We are getting near the end of our time here. So why don't we let each of our other panelists also give some comment regarding the same issue if they would like to. Dr. Kraft.
About this issue, about which one's worse?
Or anything, or anything. Closing argument.
My closing argument. Oh goodness. Well, I didn't have one prepared. My closing argument is that connection is everything, and I think that's the theme that I've heard. That's why you're here today, and thank you for that. I totally applaud my colleagues who have said one person makes a difference, and that imposter phenomenon doesn't count with human kindness and presence. And so I think the biggest takeaway is if all of us here commit to only one thing, and that is to actually care about the problems that we're hearing about. And I think you are, that's why you're here, and to do whatever we can to support them. We're going to be part of that overall structure that can make this better, because we can. And one more thing, we talk a lot about resilience in nursing. And one of the things that I kind of push back on that is it's great to become resilient, but that doesn't mean we don't need to remove those things that are making people feel like they have to be resilient. During the pandemic, nurses said, don't bring me any more pizza. Don't want the pizza. Quit not wearing your masks. Quit, work with me on this. So I think, yeah, resilience and personal and everything we do for that is fine. But the society responsibility, as my colleague said, to do something about the things that we have to do and we can do, that is something we have to embrace. Thank you.
Dean, you have the final word.
Oh dear. Well, I I'm going to everything everyone has said. I simply want to amplify in spades because I have so many notes from the things that all of you have said, and I'm really grateful. I do also agree that this conference is emblematic of the type of work that I think we have to do. And so this conference is living it, is getting different professions and people together to have the types of discussions that I think are going to be critical and, that are critical and perhaps are necessary to any actual progress on these fronts, because these are systems within which we are working, not discrete silos. I heard someone say a moment ago, that which we ingest. So I was kind of thinking about that particular component, but I realized we ingest on our phones also. That's a different type of coping mechanism. When we click on there and we're looking at Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever they are called now, we're ingesting that too. And that's another coping mechanism that I think we can all work on with our students, with our patients, with our clients, with ourselves, with regard to what we are choosing to put in our bodies physically or metaphysically, putting in our brains. That's not very good, much of a closing statement. I guess I'll say something about the College of Law because I love that place. And it is that one of my philosophies about legal education and about the law school at OU. And I do think that this tracks that which Provost Raskob cares about here, and Provost Wright in Norman, and President Harris certainly, and probably so many people here, is that I'll take it to law. A Juris Doctorate is about more than legal education. There's so much information that we could learn. We could learn about the rule against perpetuities. We could learn about the doctrine of worthier title. We can learn about how to create an estate plan that is bulletproof. But those are facts in many ways. And law school has always been about thinking like a lawyer. And I think thinking like a lawyer modernly is going to require, and I think thinking like a human citizen modernly is going to require thinking in ways that far transcend the specific facts and information transfer, irrespective of what profession we're engaging.
All right, Commissioner, I'm going to give you the last word.
I just would be remiss if I didn't say that we have come to a nation where we now have a 3-digit number that anybody can dial around the nation, 988, who is needing help for mental health or addiction issues. In Oklahoma, that number is answered locally. 99% of those calls are answered in state. And spread the word. It could save a life.
All right, thank you all very much.